Hello, ladies and gentlemen from around the world. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Global Talkative Series with your host, Lanre Ajayi. Now, this is a platform for collaboration where we hang out and inspire one another. And one thing that is particular about this show is that we've been blessed with an array of amazing and wonderful guests from around the world taking time out of their busy schedule to come on this show to share with us, our global audience, from their world of experiences. And today's not an exception. We have an amazing icon, amazing guest in the house today. And before we're reaching you now, before we're going into the details of the live chat, I'm going to bring her in on Instagram because we are coming to you right now from Global Talkative Series Studios here in Alberta, Calgary, Canada, and we're reaching you in real time on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So I'm going to bring her in on Instagram right away. So anyone from now, we're waiting for our guests to join us on Instagram so that we can carry everybody along in this live chat and discussion. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. All right. So it's going to be coming in any moment from now. Wonderful.
Hello.
Yeah, wonderful. I can see you.
Good.
Oh,
I can see
wonderful.
you.
That is amazing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is no other person than the amazing Sherry Fogel, award-winning author, playwright, and director of the new NFB feature documentary, John Ware Reclaimed. And before we, get out to introduce ourselves or talk about ourselves, like we did on this show, I'm going to read to you the bio of our guest so that you can connect with her and understand who we are having discussion with. And for those who are just joining us now, Dr. Kangong, thank you for joining, on Instagram. And those who are watching us on Facebook and YouTube, we appreciate you for joining. So here comes the profile of our guest. Sherry Fogel is an award winning author, playwright, and filmmaker whose work over the last 30 years has focused on the lives of Western Canadians of African descent. She directed the short film Kicking Up a Fuss, the Charles Daniel story, and is a recipient of the Sandra Kelly Award from the Writers Guild of Canada, as well as the 2015 Alberta Literary Award for Drama from the Writers Guild of Alberta. She has also worked as a story editor and script consultant in the television and film, and wrote and directed the documentary The Journey of Lester Martin for the NFB. A well known author, she has been published in dozens of anthologies. Her books include the recently released 8th anniversary edition of Pouring Down Rain, A Black Woman's Claims Are Placed in the Canadian West, the young adult novels One Thing That's True, and I Have Been in Danger, and a children's picture book, There Bob. John Ware Reclaim is a second directing project with the NFB. And I must say that today, the world premiere of this documentary, produced by amazing guests today, will be premiered at this year Calgary International Film Festival, scheduled to start in the end of September, stroke first week of June. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome our guest, Sherry Fogo. How are you, Sherry?
I'm well. I'm well. End of September through first week of October. You
Okay.
said June.
Oh, sorry for that.
That would be a
End of,
very long festival.
end of September to the first week of October.
Anyway, I'm
So,
very well. I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And hello to everybody who's watching and listening.
yeah. So, to our guest today, the topic of our discussion today is unapologetically Black and Canadian in the story of history shakers and makers. And we're going to go right into the question for our guest today. Now, let's start by talking about your journey. how did you, as a black woman in Canada, become a phenomenal documentary filmmaker, film director, and many significant arts that you wear?
Well, thank you, first of all, for saying those kind things about my work. Um, I grew up in Calgary, and I was a descendant of people who had been living in Western Canada for several generations and for many, many decades. And yet, as I was growing up and going to school, I saw that our stories were absent from the storybooks. I loved reading as a kid, but I never read anything about us. There was nothing available. We were certainly absent from the social studies lessons and history classes. So as I grew up, and as my interest in writing developed, I knew that this was a story that I wanted to delve into, that I wanted to share, and that I wanted to put out there into the world for other people like me who were growing up Black
Mm,
in Western Canada and wanting to see themselves in the literature. In terms of then how I went upon my journey, I knew that was the story I wanted to tell. I knew it was a good way to get started as a writer, both because it's an interesting story that hadn't been told before, but also because it was a story that I could tell from the inside out. So that was the first thing I did was recognize that there was an important story to tell that I could be the teller of.
mm,
And I started with small projects, sharing stories about that community, and just advanced from there. And the reason I have done so many different kinds of writing, I've written for film, television, theater, radio, books, journalism. I've written a lot of different kinds of things, is because this story is so necessary for
mm,
people to hear. And I wanted to communicate with people in a lot of different ways and through a lot of different media
mm,
types. So that's kind of how it unfolded, Lonray. And my journey has been, I've had certainly faced some obstacles. I've certainly had some challenges, but for the most part, it's really been a joy to be able to
mm,
share this story with an audience.
mm. That is amazing. Now, from your own perspective, how would you describe your journey in the industry, particularly as a person of color?
It is a it can be quite challenging for people of color to get a foot in the door, to find their way in to the different artistic and media, television, journalism, whatever it is people want to do. It can be quite challenging. There are obstacles that we face when we're trying to work in those fields, and I found that I believe my family instilled in me such a strong sense of worth, of knowing that we were people of value. I loved the people in my community so much. I don't want to say I worshiped them, but I looked up to my community. I looked up to my grandmother, my grandfather, my aunts and uncles, all the people who were descendants of the Black migration of 1910. I looked up to those folks, and they helped me to be strong,
Mm,
because I did find when I started working that there were some very discouraging developments. For example, with my first book, Pouring Down Rain, you just mentioned it's just had a 30th anniversary,
yeah.
and it has had a reprint. I got some very devastating rejections of the book
Wow.
in the beginning. And people saying things, some publishers saying things that were just overtly racist. For example, one rejection letter said there aren't enough Black people in Canada for us to justify publishing this book. And it was just
Wow.
so wrong in so many different ways. It
Yeah.
was wrong because there were Black people here, but it was also wrong because our stories are of interest to everybody. It doesn't just have to be Black people that buy our books and support our works. It was just very wrong. Now, I was quite young. I was in my 20s.
Mm.
I could have easily given up at that point.
Yeah.
I could have easily said, well, I've sent it out to, this is now my 9th rejection.
Wow.
Maybe I just better fold up my tent and go home. But I didn't. And the reason I didn't give up is because of my community and
Mm.
because of that sense of worth that I had gained from the people who loved and nurtured me.
Mm.
So that's kind of a long answer to say that my journey as a woman of color, as a Black woman, is not the same as it is for a white person trying
Mm.
to break into the literary industry. No white person is ever going to get a rejection that says there aren't enough white people for us to justify publishing this work.
Definitely.
So it's a different type of obstacle. All writers face obstacles. Don't get
Mm.
me wrong. It's not easy for anyone. But I think it's very important for people who are interested, people who are listening and who are perhaps interested in writing or working in television or radio or journalism, to have a very strong sense of the value of your story and
Mm.
know that if you are persistent and if you've done your training, you've done the work, you're not afraid of criticism, you accept people's commentary and work with it as much as you can. You're a learner. If you've done all those things, you know the work is good. It is really important to recognize and remember always the value of our stories.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Now that leads me to the next question. Now you said something about the migration of the blacks in 1910.
Yes. Mhm.
Now that leads me to the next question is, give us a bit of history behind your family background, growing up as a black person in Canada.
Sure. Yeah. Um, in between 1905 and 1912, a group of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 Black people came to northern Alberta and northern Saskatchewan from lots of them were from Oklahoma, but also from other southern states because they were being brutalized, horrifically brutalized where they were living.
Mm.
The Canadian government started advertising for farmers, for American farmers to come up and um, build homesteads, and they wanted people to clear the land and plant crops and that kind of thing. And those two things happened at the same time. Oklahoma was about to become a state. Prior to that, Black people flocked there in droves because before Oklahoma was a state, it was divided into two territories where Black people could vote, own property, pretty well had, the full rights of citizenship. Black people were thriving there. You may
Mm.
have heard of the community that's known as Black Wall Street,
Yes,
which
that was
was,
great.
yes, that's right. That is the community that my ancestors were living in. They were a part of building up that community there. And then the horrific um, massacre that took place in 1919, I believe it was, or was it 1921? A horrific massacre of those people who were living on what's known as Black Wall Street, which is the Greenwood community
Yeah,
in Tulsa,
Alabama.
Oklahoma. Um, my ancestors had already left by then, along with 1,500, 2,000 people, because that kind of hate
Mm.
that culminated in that massacre was already being directed at them. So they were being brutalized. The Canadian government was advertising at the same time. They came here and very quickly realized the Canadian government was not expecting Black people to answer that advertisement. So they immediately faced barriers and obstacles as soon as they got to the border. So between 1905 and approximately 1912, that's what happened. Both sets of my maternal great grandparents were a part of that migration, along with many, many friends and relatives. And so they formed 5 small Black communities, 4 in Alberta and 1 in Saskatchewan. And they supported each other, and they built up these pretty remarkable and very interesting communities. And then in the 20s, 30s, 40s, a lot of conditions came along that caused them to want um, to leave and go to the cities. And that's what happened. My grandfather and grandmother, who had been living near Lashburn, Saskatchewan, went to live in Regina in 1926. And that's the community where my mother was born. My mother was born in Regina. And so the cities then started seeing an influx of these people who had settled these 5 small Black communities. Now, that's a very brief nutshell explanation of my community. But what I started to find out as a researcher is that there were already Black communities here that we came into and that we joined with way back in 1910. So I grew up sort of thinking we were, more or less the first Black people that had come here. I later, through my research, discovered that's not the case. There were already Black people here in the cities, in smaller rural communities. We were already here. And, going back to the 1870s, there has been a Black presence in southern Alberta and the rest of Alberta as well.
Hmm. That is amazing. This is still the Global Talkative series with our amazing guest today, Cheryl Fogo, award-winning author, playwright, and director. And today's topic of discussion is unapologetically Black and Canadian, the story of history shakers and makers. Now, while you were talking about your family background and the challenges that happened in Greenwood, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street,
Mhm.
it was a thriving community. They had their schools, their banking system, their businesses, everything was flourishing. And we knew from history that, racism, challenges, hatred, a lot of things. And then that led to them to start migrating to Canada, while the Canadian government was extending an invitation and a ham of fellowship that come live in Canada, come work on our lands. Now they were escaping from something, the issue of racism, hatred,
Violence.
violence, and all of that. Now they now move to Canada, and they are facing the same thing. So, and this has been a major and hot topic for a long time. Now the question is racism real in Canada?
Well, sure it is. I mean, even just from that story that I just told you, and you made the very good point that people came here to escape hatred, violence, um, confiscation of their land, confiscation of their property, uh, destruction of their businesses, and yet came across and faced some of the same issues when they got here. One of the the original pioneers who came up and founded Amber Valley, Alberta, and for those who have never heard of Amber Valley, it is the largest and best known of those 5 small Black communities, and it is also believed to be the most northerly community of Black people that has ever existed anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
One of the founders of Amber Valley left Oklahoma because he was the first person in his district to own a telephone.
Wow.
And white people were so filled with jealousy and hatred because he owned a telephone before they did,
What?
that yes, that they attacked him viciously. He was afraid for his life and for his family's life. So that is the initiating incident that caused him to say, yeah, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go up to this place called Canada, which of course they had heard about,
Hmm.
because Canada is embedded in the coded language of spirituals.
Hmm.
There's lots of language that refers to the promised land and heaven and
Yeah.
Canaan land. That is, it is talking about the North in general, but also specifically about Canada. So they had heard of Canada. They thought they would come on up, and yet the same person who fled Oklahoma because his life was endangered for the simple act of being successful enough to own a telephone. He and 4 or 5 of the men in the community in Amber Valley were also attacked by the Ku Klux Klan up there.
Wow.
So, when people mistakenly believe that racism has not been a part of the lives of people of color in Canada, that is a mistake that has real life consequences today. Because if we do not know or recognize the racism that happened right from the very beginning, we can't recognize the racism that continues to happen. Sadly, there is no generation of descendants from the Black migration of 1910. There is no generation that has never experienced racism.
Mm.
People in their individual lives can succeed and can make good lives, but I would be shocked if there was a single Black person from that migration who would say they never experienced racism of any generation. I know it still happens, and it's heartbreaking. It breaks my heart. But yes, the answer to that question, sadly, is yes.
Hmm. Wow, this is amazing. And what has been the highlight of racial discrimination for you, and what did those pivotal moments mean for you and the rest of the Black community in Canada?
I think of it more as a low light. What are the low lights? What are the things that have happened that have been so horrific? I guess because I'm a researcher, I think back to Charles Daniels in 1914. And in my bio, you read about a short film I just made called Kicking Up a Fuss about Charles Daniels, who was I'm trying to look both at my Instagram audience and the Facebook audience. So forgive me, everybody, if
Okay.
it seems like I'm not looking. Charles Daniels was a Black man who in 1914 bought a ticket to go see King Lear at the Grand Theatre in downtown Calgary. The Grand Theatre is still there.
Yeah.
And he got to the theater, and they refused to let him sit in his seat, which was in the orchestra, in the main area where people sat. They wanted him to go sit up in the segregated seating up in the balcony. He refused. He said, I've got a ticket. I bought my ticket. I paid for it. I'm sitting in the seat that I paid for. They dragged him out and humiliated him and refused to let him have his seat. So he launched a lawsuit against the Grand Theatre, Senator James Lougheed, who owned that building, and William Sherman, who was the manager of the theater. And it was a very long, drawn-out process. Charles Daniels was a superstar. It was amazing. When you read the transcripts of the court case, when you hear his actual words, he was so strong. He was so powerful. His belief in himself and his right to buy a ticket, go see a show, and sit anywhere he wanted was very, very strong. So that's a really interesting case, and it's one of the shameful incidents of our past. But then in 1920, there was a petition got up in the community of Victoria Park, a community that still exists here, trying to make it so that Black people could not move into that community. 75% of white people who lived in that community signed that petition. Can you imagine what it would be like trying to live your life, walking around in your neighborhood and knowing that 3/4 of your neighbors thought you were so far beneath them that you did not have the right to even live?
Wow,
That you just did not.
terrible.
It is astonishing. And then it just goes on and on. There was another incident in the 1940s during the Second World War where there was a riot where between 200 and 300 white soldiers stormed the home of 2 Black musicians because one of the white soldiers' girlfriends had flirted with one of these 2 Black men. They were the owners of a nightclub in downtown Calgary. They were also the band members. That these 2 men were in a band. They owned this club. Sometimes white people came to the club. one of these soldiers' girlfriends flirted with one of them. That caused a riot that destroyed these people's home and almost cost one of the people that was in the house at the time
Wow.
his life. So these incidents, there are many, and I could go on, but sadly, you could ask me about any decade. You could ask me, well, what happened in the 50s? What happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s? It goes on and on. Um, these are the kinds of things that we need to recognize happened in the past, because every time there's an incident of racism, people think it is an isolated incident. When you understand that these incidents have been embedded in our history from the beginning, and that good people who just wanted to make a contribution and live their lives and work hard and raise their families in safety and peace were not allowed to do that. They were
Mm,
not allowed to have access to that safety and peace.
mm,
You understand more about the world we're living in today. That's why
mm.
I think history is so important, because we cannot
Exactly.
know what is happening in our lives today or why it's happening. We can know what's happening, we can see it.
Yeah,
We
it's
can't
important.
understand why it's happened unless we know that it is linked to the
Mm,
past.
that's amazing. I have a comment from Cheryl Martin, and I'm just going to bring in the comments. It said the history of black influx into Western Canada is not taught to Eastern Canada. Being from not maybe not Saskatchewan or not NS, it never occurred to me that there were black people outside of the Eastern Canada back in history. We only learn of blacks entering Canada in the Maritimes, Quebec, and Ontario. The shame of not knowing our national history so hard is shocking. I have recently learned of the black people in BC and how that came to be, including Morgan's Alley. History needs to be massively overhauled. And he said something, someone said, any decade ongoing racism still today. And I can't agree better. What do you have anything to say about that?
Yes. Hi, Cheryl, and thanks for that observation. It's so true. It is important for us to know our history. It's also tragic that we don't know it, because it is so interesting. So, Cheryl, you specifically mentioned Hogan's Alley in Vancouver. What an amazing story that is. And it also has connections to the migration into Saskatchewan and Alberta. Many people don't know that Jimi Hendrix, the famous guitarist, Jimi
Yeah.
Hendrix's grandmother, was a member of that community in Hogan's Alley.
Wow.
She had a restaurant, and Jimi Hendrix would go and hang out at his grandma's restaurant all the time. He played music up in Vancouver because there was such a thriving music scene that was created and was part of the lives of these migrations. And Hogan's Alley was a really thriving community that eventually was destroyed, as has happened to so many of our historic black communities. People simply didn't want it there. And so
Mm,
they tore it down and created a viaduct. But now there are people in Vancouver who are reviving the history and um, making sure that that history is known in that neighborhood. And I believe is a plan in place to I'm not sure if to recreate, but just to make sure that that history is represented for people in Vancouver. And then the history of Black people in British Columbia also is even older, much older than our history in Alberta and Saskatchewan, because of the Black people who settled on Salt Spring Island. That beautiful little island
yeah.
had a
Mm,
thriving Black history and Black community. These are
mm,
stories that all Canadians should know. First
mm,
of all, because they connect to our lives today and they help us understand the world we're living in today, but also because they are amazing stories full of fascinating people who did wonderful things and made great contributions to Canadian society.
That's amazing. Sherry Martin said, amazing history of Organs Alley. My brother, not knowing this history, first lived on Union Street when he moved to BC in 2006. Thank you, Sherry, for that addition. Now, I have a question. This issue of racism has been so long happening, from generation to generation. I'm kind of curious. I don't know if you have the right answer or anybody does have the right answer. Why do people choose to hate? I quite understand if you offend me or you do something bad to me, then I'm angry at you. That okay, probably you stole my thing or you injured me or something, you did something bad. But for no reason, you just don't like my person. I'm not sure you have the right answer, but can you try explain why do people choose to hate for no reason?
Oh, I don't think I can explain because, in a way, it's like asking me or us, me or you, to explain why our very skin color offends
Hmm.
people who hate us and they don't know us. As you say, it doesn't have to be somebody that knows me that acts hatefully toward me. It can be a perfect stranger. It can be I can be walking down the street and someone who doesn't know anything about me can roll down their car window and shout out a racial slur or something mean.
Yeah.
And I think I there are people who study um, critical race theory and who can can talk about these things in a much more articulate way. All I can say is there is no reason. There is no reason that I can give or explain. It is within that person, and it is, as I say on the in my book, Pouring Down Rain. Racism actually is not a problem within me. It is a problem that I have to deal with, but it's not something that comes from within me. It is the problem of the person who is the perpetrator of it. So it's a very deep question, and I think instinctively we ask ourselves that, especially when we're young. We ask ourselves, why do people hate us?
Yeah.
We're nice, we're great, we're talented, we're brilliant, we're beautiful. And I think as a child, when you see that hatred and you experience it, it is kind of, sadly, you do turn it inside, you do internalize it, and ask, well,
Hmm.
why? And it is an impossible question for us to answer.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you so much. This is still the Global Talkative Series with our amazing guest, Cheryl Fogle, award winning author, playwright, and director. And the topic of our discussion today is unapologetically black and Canadian and the story of history shakers and makers. Now, if you have any question for Cheryl, you can send your question on Facebook or on YouTube or on Instagram, and then we'll do our best to answer your question. Now, the next question I have for you is this, Cheryl. What are some of the steps you think the black community can begin to take to make a difference in our society? I know
Well,
you're
I
doing
think
something amazing. So,
I think we
okay.
are. I think we are taking the steps. We're claiming our place. We
Hmm.
are making stuff happen. We are figuring out ways to walk past and walk around the obstacles that are put in our way and move forward anyway, despite
Hmm.
those obstacles. I think we have to, um, first of all, recognize the importance of our stories. I know I'm biased in this way because I work in the arts, but I think it's incredibly important for us to put forward our stories, to tell
Yeah.
them through dance, through music, through theater, through film, in books. I think young Black people who are creative should be encouraged to pursue those creative um, endeavors. A lot of times, Black families, we just want our kids to be a doctor or an engineer,
Yeah.
and those professions are fantastic. One of the descendants of the Black migration of 1910 became an engineer, and he was the person who designed and implemented the C train in Calgary. So every time
Wow.
you ride on the C train, you got to understand you owe a debt to Mr. Oliver Bowen.
Wow.
Um,
That is huge.
yeah, it's huge. And so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we don't need engineers, but I feel sad when I see young Black people who feel that there's no way in for them to the arts. And you do hear of it. You do people who hear of people saying, well, I go to the theater and I don't see myself there and I don't see a way in. I think I think it is through story that people move forward. I think it makes a huge contribution anyway. It's not the only way, but you're asking me the question and I'm an artist. So that's the only answer I can give you, is that we need to take steps to claim our stories, to reclaim them when they've been told incorrectly,
Mm.
and to put those stories out there in the world. Um, we need to continue to love each other and lift each other up as we do. I have a community of young Black women in Calgary that I love so much. I think some of them are probably listening. I think Tasha's out there listening. I thought I saw her make a comment earlier, and it's a mutual thing. They feel inspired by me because of what I've done in my life, but I feel inspired by them, and
Mm.
I lift them up and they lift me up, and that's just what we do. That's how we
Mm.
do. I think there are problems in society that we actually do not have all the answers for, and we don't have all the correctives, because these problems are so deeply entrenched in white supremacy. And I think
Mm.
these are problems that all of society has to work together to resolve. But your question to me is, what steps can we take? We need to take
Yeah.
our lives in hand. We need to live our lives to the fullest. We need to laugh. We need to enjoy. My film that's going to be coming out, John Ware Reclaimed, is not just a film about the racism that John Ware experienced. It is also a film about just the beauty of who John Ware was. And I just want people who see the film just to be able to sit in that beauty and that joy and that love. Um, there's Tasha.
Yeah. Thank you,
Um,
Tasha.
yeah, so it's easy to get discouraged.
Yeah.
It's easy to get discouraged, and sometimes it's very painful to watch brothers and sisters in our community being brutalized, or to watch our people dying.
Mm.
That's very painful and it's hard. And I can't even broach that topic without kind of tearing up and feeling that pain.
Mm.
Um, but we need to keep on keeping on. We need to carry on. We need to not let life suck the joy out of us, or diminish our talents. We do need to continue to let our light shine, and we have so much light to
Yeah.
bring.
Exactly. Now, talking in terms of pain and the challenges that our community is facing, given the recent incidents about the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movements, what is your perspective? While all this were happening, how are you feeling? What was going through your mind?
Oh man, I had some very dark days, very, very dark times. Um, Not just beginning with George Floyd, but going back to the killing of those 9 or 10, I think it was 9 Black folks who were in church.
Yeah.
I was I think I was in the UK at the time that happened, and it just sucked the life out of that trip for me.
Wow.
and and then moving forward to so many deaths that have happened since, including Breonna Taylor,
Hello. Yeah.
Ahmaud Arbery,
Aubrey, Trayvon
Beau-
Martin.
beautiful little Trayvon Martin, uh, Mike Brown. There are so many names, Sandra Bland. We know these names. These
Yeah.
names, we don't have to go look on our phones to find these names. These names live with us because we experience each other's pain. Just as we lift each other up, we are devastated when lives are taken for no other reason than that person was Black
Mm.
or Indigenous. It happens. It
Yes.
happens all around us with our Indigenous nations as well in Canada. Um, so that's what was going through my head at that time, was just that this was not new, but it was incredibly painful. The thing that was different after the death of George Floyd was the level of protest that is
Yeah.
still ongoing. And my perspective on that is, God bless young people, because
Mm.
people of my generation have been marching for a long time and um, trying this and trying that. I just don't feel there are actions that I personally wouldn't take. There are things that I wouldn't do, but I do not judge other people for the actions that they take. I believe it takes all of us doing each doing our piece. I
Yeah.
really try to stay focused on my work, because when I'm in that much pain, as I was after the death of George Floyd, I actually can't work. I cannot do my work.
Mm.
It's too overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if I don't do my work, then these stories don't move forward, right? So
Exactly.
that's my piece of it. That's what I do. And I don't make judgments around what choices another Black person makes in terms of what action they're going to take. And I'm really grateful to young people who are in the Black Lives Matter movement, who are who
Stepping
are
up.
just going to keep speaking, stepping
Mm.
up, keep speaking
Stepping out.
until we are heard.
Mm. That is amazing. And with that, also, we had the COVID-19 situation, the challenge of COVID-19, the virus. So, in your view, what critical steps or disposition do we need to have as we live in what we now know as the new normal, as the world is changing?
Oh, one of the things that I have had to confront because of COVID-19 is how much I did not know about the way in which these international health crises impact communities of color.
Hmm.
I was really devastated by the deaths that happened at the Cargill meatpacking
Yeah.
plant
Yeah.
in southern Alberta. I met a lot of folks who worked in Brooks, so not at the Cargill plant, but who worked at the plant down closer to Brooks, and lots of beautiful people of color, especially African people, came out to see our presentations of John Ware Reimagined over the years, when we would travel down to southern Alberta to these little small communities that were connected to the life of John and Mildred Ware, or to their kids. And it was really crushing to see the circumstances under which people were working, and how they were not um, they were not made safe.
Hmm.
They were not made safe. They were not,
Exposed.
they were asking, yeah, they were just put out there as almost like sacrifices. Um, and that was a real eye opener for me, just in terms of thinking about my life and all the privilege that I have in my life for a variety of reasons. Um, but that there are people living, nearby me, living side by side, who must feel like they're disposable. And that is horrifying. So, one of the things I would like to see in the next normal, or in the next world, is for us to recognize the value of people who do the kind of work that kept society going. I'm not the
Exactly.
first person to say this. Many,
Yeah.
many people have said, you really know what are the true essential jobs when you
Hmm.
see the jobs that they're refusing to shut down. They're refusing to let people stay home in safety. So I would like to see working conditions change for migrant workers, for immigrant families and communities who come to fill those kinds of jobs. I would really like us to have that up in our faces and not in the background as something that we don't have to think about.
mm,
I don't know. I mean, I had to drive out among the city today to go to an interview, and the traffic was horrible and the construction was horrible, and it was back like the old normal. And I was thinking about what it was like when there weren't as many cars on the roads and people were walking more or bicycling. And I saw birds around even in my yard that I have never seen before. I just
wow.
think we need to rethink the way we do things. And
Mm,
I would like to see a better world. I know it's going to be a huge struggle. I know we have many obstacles to face economically
mm,
and socially, but I would like to see us look at some of the things that we were looking at during the COVID shutdown and the lockdowns, and see if there are ways that we can implement permanent change.
that is amazing. Thank you so much. This is still the Global Talkative Series with your host, Lanre Ajayi, and with our amazing guest, Cheryl Fogel, award winning author, playwright, and director. And I want to use the opportunity to appreciate all those who have joined us in this live chat. Manzion Davis, thank you for joining. B. Ilori Oladele from the United States of America, thank you. Tasha Ruth, thank you. B. Ajayi, thank you. Iya Femi, thank you. Kate Miller, thank you. Tomi Adremi Ajayi, thank you for joining us. And all those who are still joining us from around the world, we appreciate you. We still have our guests in their house. And if you have any question for Sherry Fogo, go ahead and just post the question on Facebook or on YouTube or on Instagram, and Sherry will do her best to answer the question. Now, talking in terms of the challenges that we're facing as a community in regards to the new normal and the lessons we're learning, do you think we are doing enough? We're doing enough to learn or better position ourselves for the future as a community. Are we doing enough? Are we learning enough? This experience, what kind of lesson are we doing something better to position ourselves as a community for the future in case of any occurrences?
Um, so I think I I live and operate in a world where people are doing enough and more than enough often. I see people, I meet people like you, Lonray, who are doing a lot, doing
Thank you
enough,
very much.
doing more than enough. I meet people like the some of the young women that I've been talking about who are working really hard and doing everything, going above and beyond. I guess I can't answer for I can't speak for all Black folks. Um, I suppose there might be somebody that's not doing enough. I think we really need to be careful and aggressive about where we get our information. So Malcolm X used to talk about this a lot, about how if society hates you, some of the messages that you get from the institutions within that society are going to hate you.
Mhm.
Um, and I see a lot of Black people, alarmingly to me, relying on news sources that are not trustworthy. And I think it's because there is some distrust of the mainstream
Media.
media, which I understand because, as Malcolm X said, um, if all you do is read the newspaper, you might find yourself hating the oppressed and loving the oppressor.
Mm,
And I get that and I understand it. I think though that there are sources out there that really mean harm to us, that really mean ill to us. And so, one of the things that I think we can do better, one of the steps that we can take is to triple, quadruple, 10 times check information that you're getting, check your sources, look at all kinds of different sources, look within yourself, talk to elders in the community to find out whether there's a certain thing that's being put out there um, that you should believe. I just think it's important for us. That's why it's also important for us to have our own sources, right?
Yeah.
It's important for us to contribute to the sources, because if we're not there to be the checks and balances for those stories, then those stories are simply not going to reflect us. So I think that is, I see a lot of Black folks doing a lot of work and a lot of heavy lifting. And I think, for the most part, yeah, we're doing enough. We're doing more than enough. But I think it's really important to heed the words of Bob Marley,
Mm.
and emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and
Yeah.
um, not be easily swayed by any source of information.
That is amazing. Still on the Global Talkative series, we have about 8 minutes more to the end of this broadcast. And if you have any question, you can still send a question in. Now, while I was reading your bio, it was announced today that the world premiere of your recent project, John Ware Reclaimed, will be premiered at the Calgary International Film Festival coming towards the end of September to first week of October. Now,
Right.
tell us about this project.
Mm.
What can we expect?
Well, yeah. Well, for people who don't know, John Ware was an African American cowboy who arrived in southern Alberta on September 25th, 1882. And he lived the rest of his life in this part of the world. And he was a figure of incredible magnetism, skill, talent. He he was the best at everything he did. He was a tall, strong, beautiful man, and he was a brilliant horseman. He could do it all, and he was a very important part of the whole mythology around cowboys and that kind of western hospitality and all that Calgary likes to feel that it's so famous for. And I became interested in him at a young age because I was born in Calgary. I loved horses too. I pictured myself out there on the open prairie riding my horse. And so finding out about John Ware, um, first of all, having been deprived of the knowledge of him was tragic,
Yeah.
because eventually I put that little cowgirl Cheryl identity aside and said, well, that I don't see myself in that world. I'm not in those cowboy movies that I'm watching every Saturday. I'm not in those stories. And I put it aside. And if I had known more about John Ware throughout my life, I would have understood I can be anything.
Yes.
Yes, I can be a cowgirl if I want to
Absolutely.
be a cowgirl. I can love horses. Um, I can be the best
Mm.
rider, just like John Ware was. So I have an incredible love for him and his story, even though he was dead, almost 50 years before I was born, or a little more than 50 years. I love his family, his wife's story, and this is a real Calgary and southern Alberta story. So the film follows my journey of trying to find out more about him and trying to reclaim his legacy from the racist mythology that has built up around it. I was thinking about John Ware several times as we were talking, both when Cheryl Martin was talking about Hogan's Alley and how her brother lived there and didn't even know that he
Mm.
was kind of living in what had been a historic Black community, but also one of John Ware's sons
Wow.
lived as an adult in Hogan's Alley. And going back to that story I was telling about the riot by those 200 to 300 white soldiers, those were John Ware's nephews. Those
Wow.
two men who were attacked in that way, who owned that nightclub and and were musicians in that band. Those were John Ware's nephews. So his history as well, and his family's history, is all around us and everywhere, and it is connected um, to the lives of people who came after him. You know, he was long dead before that happened to his nephews, and I wasn't even born yet when that happened to his nephews. But my research connects me to those two men, and those two men were connected to my community, my great ancestors, my the people who nurtured me as a child. They lived and walked among. Some of them might have been at the club that night, for all I know. So our history really connects all of us, and that's one of the things that I try to bring forward in the film. I'm really looking forward to sharing it with Calgarians, Albertans, other Canadians, and eventually I would love to have a screening in Africa, in the UK. I actually did one of my shoots in the UK. One of my film shoots was there. So yeah, I can't wait to share it with the world.
That is amazing. Now, the question I have: do you think Canadian governments are they doing enough in terms of curriculums that we have in schools in telling the story of African and
No,
Canadians?
no,
Because
no.
all through a discussion, folks who are commenting were saying they had no idea we have such a deep history, deep story. Basically because story when we learn about our culture, about our past, it informs us about how we're gonna do, what we're gonna do, or how we're gonna behave, how we're gonna live our life. So, do you think Canadian government is doing enough in terms of
Um, I'm not sure if you can still hear and see me. I'm getting some issues with my connection. I'm going to try moving to another spot.
I can hear you, I can see you.
Okay, I can hear you and see you
Okay, I
now.
can.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's see if I have better luck over here. Sometimes I have a bit of an internet
yeah, I
dead
can see you.
spot in my house. No, no,
Okay,
not
yeah.
enough is being done. No, at a bare
Hmm,
minimum, this history and all the other Black history that we've talked about should be in all school books, right?
hmm,
School, every child who goes to school in this country should know this history. I mean, it gets said all the time, but Black history is not just Black history. Black history is history. This is
hmm,
history that belongs to all of us. So no, not enough is being done.
hmm. So, will you, for me, someone somewhere, I think it was a schoolboy somewhere in maybe in the States, they're saying that they should incorporate into the school curriculum the history of the blacks and the Caribbean. Yes or no? Answer. What do you think?
That Black history should be incorporated into the curriculum? Yes,
Yes, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. No
And I hope
question.
someone from the authority they are listening, and I hope they can do something. They can begin to start, a conversation around how to get this history, taught in our schools. We're learning about history of other nations, other Asian countries, other part of the world. How come we're not learning history about our own culture because we're part of the bigger Canadian family? And I hope something will be done soon. And I want to
Yeah.
appreciate you for your time today on the show and all the audiences, all those who join us from around the world. Mr. Alabiadene, you're just joining us. Thank you so much. Tasha Ruth, B. Ajayi, Iyafemi, Kate Miller, Tumi Ajayi, B. Lorela Dele, Dr. Kangong, Manzio Davies. Thank you for all those who joined from around the world. This is still the Global Talkative Series. And thank you, Cheryl, for your time on the show today. Until we come
Thank
again your
you.
way with amazing show next time, it's bye for now. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.